Lyndon B. Johnson, America's 36th president, is remembered for his towering presence in Washington, his Great Society programs, and the shadow of the Vietnam War. But beyond the headlines and history books, LBJ was also a father. When he died in 1973 at just 64 years old, he left behind a grieving family, including two daughters who had grown up in the White House. So whatever happened to Lyndon B. Johnson's two daughters? Number 1. Linda Bird Johnson Robb. Linda Bird Johnson was born on March 19, 1944, the first daughter of Lyndon B. Johnson and Lady Bird Johnson. From the very beginning, her life was lived in the shadow of power, history, and expectation. While most children in America learned to ride bikes and chase fireflies without the world watching, Linda grew up with photographers on the front lawn and headlines recording her every move. She was only 16 when her father became vice president, and just 19 when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, an event that thrust her father into the presidency and her family into the harshest spotlight imaginable. For Linda, the White House was not simply a symbol of America's democracy. It was her home. But home was never quiet. It was filled with advisors, Secret Service agents, protests outside the gates, and the unrelenting pressures of being a first daughter. Growing up in the White House. Unlike her younger sister Lucy, who was known for being more rebellious, Linda often carried herself with poise and restraint. She became the dutiful daughter, always smiling for cameras, standing beside her mother at social events, and serving as a public face of the Johnson family during some of the most divisive years in American history. But that poise came at a price. Behind the polished image, Linda struggled with loneliness and pressure. Her father was consumed by the Vietnam War and the Great Society programs. Her mother, though deeply caring, was often preoccupied with supporting her husband. For Linda, life in the White House meant playing the role of the supportive daughter while trying to discover who she really was: love, heartbreak, and a public romance. In the early 1960s, Linda began dating actor George Hamilton. Their romance was splashed across tabloids, mixing Hollywood glamour with political prestige. For a time, America was captivated by the pairing, the movie star and the first daughter. But the relationship ended, and though it seemed like youthful heartbreak, it also revealed how difficult it was for Linda to find normal love under the microscope of fame. In 1967, she married Charles Robb, a decorated Marine who had served in Vietnam. Their wedding was televised and covered by every major paper in the country. To many, it looked like a fairy tale, the president's daughter marrying a war hero. But marriage brought its own challenges. Charles Robb was ambitious, rising to become governor of Virginia and later a U.S. senator. That meant Linda was once again thrust into public life, not only as a first daughter but also as a political spouse. The heavy role of a political wife. Being a political wife demanded grace, patience, and constant sacrifice. For years, Linda juggled raising three daughters, Lucinda, Catherine, and Jennifer, with endless public appearances. She stood by her husband on campaign trails, smiled at rallies, and entertained dignitaries. To the public, she seemed composed and strong, the perfect blend of first daughter and first lady of Virginia. But privately, there were struggles. Politics is unforgiving, and Charles Robb's career was marked by both triumph and controversy. In the 1990s, during his time in the Senate, Robb's reputation was shaken by reports of questionable associations and alleged extramarital indiscretions. Though he denied wrongdoing, the headlines were relentless. For Linda, the scandals were a bitter echo of what she had already endured as a young woman watching her father weather criticism and political attacks. Once again, she was forced to wear a smile in public while carrying private humiliation. Her own quiet battles, Linda, however, was never just a political accessory. She sought to create her own legacy, carving out a career in public service. She became chairwoman of the President's Advisory Committee for Women under Jimmy Carter and later worked on causes close to her heart, like literacy and healthcare. Her involvement with the Lyndon B. Johnson Foundation helped preserve her parents' memory, but it also kept her tethered to the family legacy that had always defined her life. Behind the accolades, though, Linda carried personal sadness. Friends often noted that she longed for a sense of normalcy she could never fully have. Depression quietly touched her life, as it had with her mother at times, and she lived with the burden of being the eldest child of one of America's most polarizing presidents. She loved her father fiercely, but she also bore the scars of his controversial legacy. The Vietnam War, in particular, left a deep shadow. She was often confronted by protesters who saw her family name as synonymous with tragedy and loss. The later years, resilience and reflection. As she entered her later years, Linda became a guardian of the Johnson legacy. She frequently spoke about her parents, defended her father's record, and emphasized the importance of remembering not just the war, but also the domestic achievements of the Johnson presidency: civil rights, Medicare, education. She dedicated herself to institutions that preserved history, all while remaining devoted to her children and grandchildren. Yet the weight of personal loss never left her. In 1973, when Lyndon B. Johnson died of a heart attack, Linda was just 29 years old. She had already lost the man who had defined her life. Later, as scandals surrounded her husband, she endured the pain of watching her family name questioned again. And throughout it all, she fought the quiet battles of loneliness, depression, and the impossible task of living up to the Roosevelt-like legend of the Johnson name. Legacy of the First Daughter. Today, Linda Bird Johnson. Rob is remembered as one of the last living direct links to LBJ's presidency. Now in her late 70s, she is described by friends and historians as gracious, loyal, and steady, but also as someone whose life has been defined by sacrifice and the shadows of her family's triumphs and controversies. Her story is not one of glamour, though she lived in the White House. It is not one of political power, though she married a governor and senator. It is a story of endurance, of a woman who carried the Johnson name with dignity, even when it cost her personally. For Linda, being the daughter of a president meant inheriting both privilege and pain. She endured public heartbreak, private humiliation, and the lifelong burden of history. But through it all, she stood tall, choosing resilience over collapse, service over silence. She remains, to this day, the daughter who carried her father's legacy most directly, and also the daughter who bore its heaviest weight. Number 2, Lucy Baines. Johnson, 1947. Lucy Baines. Johnson was born on July 2, 1947, the youngest daughter of Lyndon and Lady Bird Johnson. Unlike her older sister Linda, who carried herself with a quiet steadiness, Lucy was known from the start as spirited, outspoken, and unafraid of attention. Yet for all her outward confidence, her life, too, would be marked by the contradictions of privilege, pressure, and personal pain. She was just 16 when fate transformed her world. After John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, her father was sworn in as President of the United States aboard Air Force One. Overnight, Lucy went from a Texas teenager to a first daughter in the White House. The sudden transition thrust her into a world of state dinners, Secret Service escorts, and constant press attention. While most young women her age were navigating high school dances, Lucy was navigating the expectations of being the president's daughter during one of America's most turbulent decades. Faith and a televised wedding. In 1966, Lucy stunned many by announcing she had converted to Roman Catholicism, a decision that made national headlines. At just 19, she entered into a highly publicized marriage with Patrick Nugent, a U.S. Air National Guardsman. The wedding at the Basilica of the National Shrine in Washington, D.C. was broadcast live on television, watched by millions. For America, it was a rare moment of joy amid the deep divisions of the Vietnam War. For Lucy, It was both a fairy tale and the beginning of a difficult journey. The young couple had 4 children together, and for a time, Lucy embraced the role of wife and mother. But behind the smiles and photographs, the marriage was troubled. The pressures of public life, Patrick's military obligations, and personal differences strained their relationship. By 1979, the marriage ended in divorce, an ordeal that brought both personal pain and public scrutiny. For Lucy, raised in a family that prized loyalty and resilience, divorce felt like failure. Another reminder that the life of a first daughter could rarely follow a simple script: reinvention and resilience. In the years that followed, Lucy sought stability and reinvention. She eventually remarried to Canadian financier Ian Turpin, and together they built a partnership rooted in business and philanthropy. With Ian, Lucy stepped into leadership roles, managing LBJ Asset Management Partners and serving on boards that oversaw healthcare, education, and Texas historical preservation. She became known not just as a first daughter, but as a determined businesswoman and philanthropist, particularly passionate about medical research and children's hospitals. Friends noted that she inherited her mother's practicality and her father's drive, channeling both into her projects. Yet even as she built a respected career, shadows from the past lingered. The sense of being forever defined by her last name, and the knowledge that every achievement would be measured against her father's towering legacy. Health struggles and survival. In 2010, life tested her in a new, cruel way. Lucy was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare autoimmune disorder that left her temporarily unable to walk. For months, she endured painful treatments, physical therapy, and the fear that she might never fully recover. The illness was humbling for a woman known for her energy and strength. But true to her family's tradition of perseverance, Lucy fought back. Slowly, she regained her strength, eventually walking again. A survivor not just of political storms, but of physical debilitation. The illness left a deep impression. In interviews, Lucy often spoke about faith, resilience, and the importance of family during life's hardest trials. To many, she became a symbol of the Johnson family's ability to endure, even when personal suffering unfolded far from the public eye. The daughter of a complicated legacy. Today, Lucy Baines Johnson remains active in Texas philanthropy and in preserving her father's memory through the LBJ Foundation. She speaks candidly about his legacy, the triumphs of the Civil Rights Act and Medicare, but also the pain and controversy of the Vietnam War. Unlike some political children who shy away from their parents' reputations, Lucy has embraced hers, determined to ensure that history remembers the full complexity of Lyndon B. Johnson. Her life, however, has been more than just stewardship of a legacy. It has been one of reinvention after heartbreak, resilience in the face of illness, and the quiet endurance of a woman who grew up too fast under the brightest spotlight imaginable. Behind the televised wedding gowns and the philanthropic awards is a woman who has carried both privilege and sorrow. She lost her father when she was just 21, endured divorce in full public view, faced down debilitating illness, and yet chose to live with purpose and grace. Lucy's story reminds us that the daughters of presidents are not immune to pain. They love, they lose, they fall, and they rise again. In Lucy Baines Johnson, we see the arc of a life that has known glamour and heartbreak, faith and doubt, fragility and resilience, all bound together by the unshakable truth of being a Johnson. Lady Bird Johnson, 1912 to 2007. No account of Lyndon B. Johnson's children is complete without remembering the woman who held the family together, Claudia Alta Lady Bird Johnson. Born in 1912 in Karnak, Texas, she was the quiet force who steadied a stormy husband and nurtured 2 daughters in the harsh light of Washington politics. As First Lady, Lady Bird was far from ornamental. She championed environmental conservation and led the famous beautification projects that planted wildflowers across highways and renewed America's landscapes. Her calm presence contrasted with LBJ's explosive temper, and many historians credit her with preserving both his political career and his personal sanity. Yet her private trials were immense. She endured Lyndon's infamous mood swings and rumors of infidelity while raising Linda and Lucy largely on her own during long absences. After LBJ's sudden death in 1973, she poured her energy into the LBJ Library and Foundation, ensuring her husband's legacy would be remembered in all its complexity. She lived until 2007, reaching the age of 94. By then, she was seen not only as the wife of a president, but as the matriarch of the Johnson family, the resilient mother who balanced duty, dignity, and devotion through decades of triumph and tragedy. From Linda's steady presence, to Lucy's resilience, to Lady Bird's enduring grace, the Johnson women carried forward the family story long after LBJ himself was gone. Their lives remind us that behind the speeches and headlines, history is also written in the private sacrifices of daughters and wives. Lyndon B. Johnson once said that his greatest achievement was not the Great Society, but his family. Looking at the women he left behind, perhaps that was true. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon, so you won't miss the next journey into the hidden stories behind America's most powerful families.